you've mentioned a few times as you're discussing this that historians like to ignore this. Historians like to ignore that, or they paint this one-sided picture. And the way you actually describe it is that the one-sided picture they paint is the opposite of what is true. I'm curious about what you think the motivation is by those historians.
I think there's several. I think today it's kind of, it's snowballed, and it's just, that's the narrative. So if you're just a moderately, if you go to college today and you're a history major and you're studying this field, you're not going to read primary sources, which you should. That used to be the original thing. You're supposed to, but you go read this, 3-4 books by the secondary source would be, like me, okay, a modern person who supposedly consults the primary sources and then, puts it into a book form and you read it. So most people will read that. And those books now, they've been going, and the question is why, but have painted a completely different picture. A guy like Sir Stephen Runciman, for example, he wrote like 4 or 5 volumes of the Crusades, and it was considered, the bestseller, et cetera, et cetera. I think came out maybe in the 50s or 60s. And now historians will tell you, yeah, this guy really had an axe to grind, and he was just dedicated to making the Christians look bad and making the Muslims look good. All right. And how do we know this? Because the ones who have taken the time to consult the primary sources are realizing what he's saying is not there. And oftentimes the opposite is there. So why? Okay. The reason why, I would argue today, it's because of what we would call political correctness. It's this desire, honestly, okay, really to bring it down where, the narrative has to always be this: Christians, whites are bad. Non-Christians, brown people are good. Okay, this is it. That's the mantra, and everything has to conform to this. Why? Okay, we can get into that, but that has been the case for, I would say, a long time, since the 60s, okay? And this sort of self-hatred thing has arose. But, there's also other reasons, academic reasons. For example, you want to be a historian, okay? The thing that would make you popular is you come up with a new interpretation. So for the longest time, the interpretation was what I'm telling you. But if I can come up with something clever, like, oh, wait, actually, Andalusia is a great beacon of light and learning. Okay, wow, then I've made a new contribution, especially if it's what people want to hear. People want to hear that narrative for the reasons I just explained. They don't want to hear about, okay, Christians and Muslims fighting because Muslims are aggressors, etc. So all of these, but, again, today in the current climate, it's just, what I'm saying right now, I don't care how my books, Sword and Scimitar, has like over 1,000 citations, endnotes, to show you where I got my stuff, because I already knew I'm going to be attacked. Where'd you get that? Where'd you get that? So the facts are there, but, people they still, till this very day, want to believe that narrative, okay? And you see it everywhere, manifestations of what I just said, this narrative. Even if you're watching the news and there's some kind of incident or criminal activity in between a black man and a white man or something, it has to be spun a certain way. So, of course, it's been going on with history, because history, people talk about fake news, and it's very important, obviously, but to me, fake history is more important, because fake news is ephemeral, and it creates its mischief, but then it, vanishes and we move on to something else. Fake history, you create overarching narratives and basically paradigms where you sift reality through. So if I've created a fake history where, Muslim-Christian relations are such that Christians were the evil aggressors and Muslims were the poor guys, well, of course, now when you talk about anything in the modern era and you see it through that lens, it all makes perfect sense and gives you more reason to despise the Christians and the Westerners, etc. And that's what's been going on for a long time, which is why I think when I discuss these things, the number one response I get from people is like, I'm embarrassed I didn't know this, why didn't I learn this in school? And this is why you didn't, because there's a narrative.
Fake news has a political agenda.
Right.
Then fake history, it's the agenda.
More profound.
It's more profound.
Yeah.
But it's still somewhat political, right?
Yeah, of course. It is political, and it manifests itself ultimately in a political way. But it's very subtle, and it's harder to prove. And, so fake news, we can argue, oh, here's evidence that this guy didn't say whatever. But fake history, who's going to take the time to delve into the primary sources like, let's say, I did? And I did it because I love it, and I was at the Library of Congress, and I had access to all those books, and I know a couple of languages, so it's not that easy to do that, and you're just going to go by, if I go to the bookstores, Barnes and Nobles, for example, and I go to the Middle East or a history section, all the books, and I'm familiar with them, they're all the politically correct books that say the exact opposite of what I'm telling you.
Yeah.
So if you mean well and you want to read a book and you educate yourself and you go to Barnes and Nobles, you're gonna learn the exact opposite. And that's why I always find it funny that you're better off being ignorant, because if you're ignorant, if you're an learned person, maybe just dropped high school and you didn't go to college, you're probably gonna have a better understanding of what we're talking about from an instinctual level, at least.
Yeah.
But if you go, the further you go into higher education and formally study these things, what happens is you learn the exact opposite, but then you're proud of it and you're so zealous about what you know, because I got a degree. I know this. You don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But what happened is you've been indoctrinated in lies.
Yeah. So look, you've mentioned a couple of books that have changed the popular understanding of, let's say, the Crusades and these various other moments. But could you pinpoint to a specific moment in time when the narrative changed from, as you described earlier, there was a common understanding in Europe about Islam aggression in Europe, to now where most people have no idea? Is there a moment in time where that...
The transitional phase, which is a good question. So, okay, honestly, it all really starts with, and a lot of people don't like to hear this, but with the Protestant Reformation, okay? Because with the break with the Catholic Church was a need to, I don't want to use the word demonize, but whatever, justify the break. And so anything the Catholic Church did became jaundiced and kind of bad, including the Crusades. And, the Protestants made good points, indulgences, et cetera, et cetera. I get that. That makes sense. But you got this move now where, like, whatever we can, however we can make Catholics look bad, we should. And that was the beginning. So Martin Luther, he condemned the Crusades. And then he condemned, when the Turks were actually invading Vienna or coming towards Austria, he actually said, don't fight back. And he said, this is God's way of punishing the Catholics and church, until they got close to where he was. And he actually changed his tune, literally, and wrote a new saying, no, you can't fight back. It is just war. I'm not lying to you. This is true. I can give you the evidence.
How's that for motivated reasoning?
So it really starts with a product. And look, I don't want to get into I'm not a theologian. I'm not arguing who's right theologically. I'm just saying, as a historical development, the rift in Christendom between Protestants and Catholics created a sort of hatred towards the Crusades, okay? Because it was another thing to point at and say, oh, look. And they also, this was also the beginning of the rehabilitation of Muslims in the eyes of Europeans. Because if Muslims are the enemies of the bad guys, the Catholics, they must be good, okay? And this is why till today, it's actually Protestant nations that are suffering from Islam, because they're the ones who have completely opened their doors and who follow this logic, which is Muslims are great. It's the Catholics you got to worry about. Okay, or at least elements of it still subconsciously maybe exist. And that's why you have Muslims running amok in Scandinavia and Sweden and in the UK and in Germany. But then you look at countries like, Hungary and Poland, which is, Hungary, I know, is Catholic, and so is Poland. And you don't see that sort of thing as much, of course. And I think that's so anyway, that's the beginning of it. I would say the Protestant Reformation. And again, this isn't me. I'm not talking about theology. I'm talking about historical development, which is normal, of course. And then you get the Enlightenment, right? And with the Enlightenment, all of a sudden now there's a kind of, it's not that the Muslims are good, but these Christians are fanatics. This is now Edward Gibbon, for example, and Voltaire and these guys. So now, once again, the Crusaders and their cause looks ridiculous and they're stupid. And what are they fighting over? This is dumb, etc. Okay. And then you move on until you come to sort of the modern, 19th century, 1800s. Now you have serious scholars, Orientalists. And, they just approach it in a very cold fashion. I actually like their writings. They're objective, okay? And they're looking at the sources, and they're actually better than the other guys, but you still have the influence of the sort of, the Protestant disdain for Crusades, and you have the, the Enlightenment disdain as well. And then you come into the modern era where, again, I think it's this need, where it comes from, I think sometime in the 60s, you get this move, this very anti-Christian thing where, Christians and Europeans and Westerners are the root of all problems. Okay. And of course, this is how the Crusades fit. So now it's being taught that way, and, we're gravitating back. So now it's worse than ever, because what they're doing is they're literally playing with history. I already gave you an example of all the horrors that happened before the First Crusade. In 1 year, 30,000 churches were destroyed. This is to say nothing of the killings of Christians under Hakim Amrullah, the Fatimid Caliph, or all the other ones. And they ignore all that intentionally and just tell you, oh, crusades just happened out of the blue, 5 centuries of peace, down the toilet. And now Muslims, can you imagine that when 9/11 and all that happened, and until now, when there's an Islamic terror attack in Europe, they try to actually associate it to the Crusades and say, well, Muslims are still upset about that. They have grievances. Okay. And they don't. I mean, because Muslims are not idiots. They actually respect the Crusades in the sense that, oh, okay, there was a time when Christians fought back. Oh, okay, good for them. But I mean, everything is being done, to just rewire everything so it fits that narrative.
Thanks for watching this clip from The Winston Marshall Show. You can click here to watch the full episode, and for more clips like this one, don't forget to subscribe. And as always, be well.